There we go. Recording has started.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to the Public Service Board. We've got quite a packed agenda today, so we're going to head straight in. So over to Alison for any apologies that we've received.
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Rob Stewart, Phil Roberts, Joanna Mal, Trudy Mayrick, Chris Owen, Deanne Martin and Mark Wade.
Thank you, Alison. And on to item 2, any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest? I can't see anybody indicating. And so on to the minutes. Does anybody want to move the minutes as accurate to begin with?
I'll move them. I'll move, Chair.
Thank you very much. And then on to update on actions from the previous meeting. Adam?
Yeah, only one action, and that was in relation to the wellbeing assessment, that names were going to be put forward from each of the constituent parts of the PSB. Obviously, there's been a further discussion which we'll come on to later within the agenda, but we didn't receive, we only received one nomination from any partner, and we think that's partly in relation to trying to do this on a regional basis, which we'll come on to later in the agenda. So we'll pick it up at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Adam on that? I think we're covering that later on in the agenda anyway. So any public questions?
No, Chair. No public questions received.
Okay, thanks, Alison. And so we're on to item 6, which is items for discussion, decision, approval, action plans and follow-up. And I'd really like to give a warm welcome to Martin Nichols, Director of Police for Swansea Council. I'm not going to speak on this particular item. I'm going to hand straight over to you, Martin, and then if you want to run us through the presentation, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I'll just load up the presentation. I know it's in your bundle anyway, but it's a bit easier for me to follow it from my slide pack, if that's okay. Hopefully that's coming up. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight into Swansea Council's response in terms of its drive towards net zero. I suspect that many, if not all of you, are doing very similar things, and one of the purposes of sharing this today was to really just set out the Council's approach in the hope that there's some commonality across PSB partners and perhaps some opportunities for sharing some of the things that we are doing with each other, meaning that we can crack some of these difficult conversations once and collectively. So just a couple of milestones to date. You know, like many of us, Swansea Council will have been committed to climate change for many years. Back as far as 2010, when it set off on the journey with Welsh Government in terms of the carbon reduction commitment, and has achieved significant reductions over those years and continues to do so. That culminated back in 2019, which seems a long time ago now, given everything that's taken place over the last 12 months or so. But Council declared a climate emergency via a notice of motion, and then set on a path really of developing its action plan and how it would move towards achieving net zero by its target date that it set of 2030. And that culminated in a report that went to Council just before Christmas 2020, so December 2020, where it set out the progress to date and effectively the key actions that it was intending to take. Apologies, my slide seems to have stuck. Right, try again. Okay. Some of the apologies, we were unable to fit this on 2 slides. If it's okay with everybody, I'll move on to the English version. Obviously, the Welsh version's in your pack as well. Some of the activities and some of the functions that have been taking place up to date. So this is what's been achieved to date, and then sets the journey through to 2030. As I mentioned, we started this in 2010, 55% reduction in carbon emissions over those 10, 11 years. So Welsh Government set a target of 3% year-on-year reductions, and Swansea Council has been able to achieve over 5% year-on-year reductions, which I think everybody hopefully will agree is no mean feat. And whilst the pension fund is independent, it obviously is aligned to the council's activities, and I'm pleased to see a 50% reduction in investment in fossil fuels. But effectively, that's also looking at building on that over the next few years, which will be subject to a decision by future council members. Installation of a range of vehicle charging points in council car parks, and that continues to be rolled out with support from Welsh Government and others in terms of investment. For many years, the council has committed to purchasing all of its electricity from renewable sources. We're currently undertaking a procurement exercise as part of the All Wales Consortium with the intention of maintaining that procurement from 100% renewables, but for electric, but also potentially extending that to green gas as well. 580 kilowatts of community solar energy panels installed on schools. Hopefully everybody will have picked up the wonderful work the council's been doing in terms of its new homes and its Swansea standard, which built on some of the pilot projects it's been undertaken over the last few years. That now embedding battery storage, air source heat pumps, and gives us the opportunity to look at those zero carbon homes in line with Welsh Government aspirations. 25% increase in the cycle network over the last 3 years. Swansea Council has been fortunate enough to achieve the highest grant for its active travel across the whole of Wales. So that's giving the opportunity to invest that with funding via Welsh Government. One of, if not the largest fleet of green vehicles within the local authorities in Wales. We are currently undertaking further procurement exercises to increase those number of electric and other renewable vehicles. It is a challenge, particularly with the heavy goods vehicles, but something that we're hoping that the technology will catch up with the aspiration in due course. Heavy involvement and needs to be in terms of our young people via our schools and other engagement to make sure that we engage with the future generations as part of this important agenda. Big improvements across all of Wales in terms of recycling levels. We'd achieved the 64% target for 1920. This year will have been much more difficult for everybody because of the lockdown and the changes in behaviours, but we're still optimistic we can achieve it for this year. But obviously those targets become more strict over coming years. Over 20,000 street lights changed to LEDs, making a significant reduction, around about 60% plus of emissions in relation to street lighting. And no presentation would be complete without a reference to Dragon Energy Island and the intention that the council has to continue to champion the ability to deliver that. So what are we hoping to do going forward? Well, by 2050, the objective is to look to get not just Swansea Council, but Swansea, the whole city and county, to get the net zero by 2050 target. Now, in addition to that, and I guess a target for us as an organisation is that Swansea Council itself is looking to achieve that net zero by 2030 for its own in-scope emissions, which is effectively the Scope 1 and Scope 2 direct emissions. But we are waiting for Welsh Government guidance on that to identify effectively whether they may widen that scope both for themselves and the wider public sector. And really what we were trying to do is to just show that the council really needs to lead by example in terms of how it engages with, you know, the full range of sectors around businesses, citizens, the council itself, and obviously wider community and partners. And how those actions and that commitment in terms of achieving its 2030 ambition then feed into the wider longer term 2050 target. Quite clearly, that isn't a case of waiting till, you know, 2030, 2040 or later to take some of those actions. Many of those need to be initiated very soon because quite clearly they have a long lead-in time to be able to implement them. So effectively, it's about sort of just trying to get the point across, and we've undertaken a recent consultation on this, where we are taking action, but effectively to make the difference that we need to, because the council's emissions only form a small part of the total emissions. Everybody needs to play a part in that journey. Our sort of way we've tried to demonstrate this, which has been amended over the last sort of 12 months and probably will be going forward, is to try and review all of its existing policies, and particularly the fundamental underpinning policies. And that's then wrapped up with the various legislation that goes along with that in terms of Future Wellbeing Act, Sustainable Development, and our own corporate plan, and how that climate change strategy can then effectively ring fence and knit those various individual strands together. So they're not intended to be mutually exclusive. They do overlap, and in many cases they're not solely about zero carbon, but they are things the council is doing anyway. And what we wanted to try and do is to ensure that as each of those policy areas are up for renewal or are amended, or if legislation changes, there's a read across from each of the individual strands, and that's captured then as part of the total picture. So effectively, you've got the energy strategy, which is already embedded and agreed. You've got things like agriculture and biodiversity and the local development plan linked to our planning policy. You know, many of those have been in force for years, or predecessors would have been in force prior to that. In terms of some of the other activities, perhaps around procurement or sustainable transport, we have been doing lots of good things, such as green fleet strategy, or as I said, decarbonising the street lighting network, but it perhaps hasn't been joined together under the emphasis of sustainable transport. So what we're trying to do is, as I said, knit these together and effectively make sure that they cross-reference and relate to each other. And the same will be said about the emerging and updated procurement strategy and how that links into the Welsh Government's changes, and our next iteration of the waste management strategy, which Welsh Government are also working on once we reach the end of the current plan over the next 2 years. So really, it's about just trying to demonstrate that what we've hopefully got is a whole council integrated approach, both in terms of officers and members. I'm really pleased that, you know, Cabinet and all members across council, both through the motion and since, fully endorse the actions that we're taking. And then it's about getting those actions and how we target those in-scope emissions. So just the last couple of slides in terms of some of the things we are doing specifically. Mentioned green vehicles and green in the fleet. We have between 3 and 5% year-on-year reduction planned as part of our strategy. That's partly around sourcing the right vehicles, but it's partly about behaviour changes as well. That links into the staff travel policy, or the grey fleet strategy, where, you know, we still have a lot of employees using their own vehicles. Interestingly, during the first few months of the first lockdown back last year, there was around about 500,000 miles less done in the first 6 months than might have been in any normal year, purely as a result of the way in which the council had to change the way it carried out its functions. Now, whilst that was enforced through the pandemic, there are clearly opportunities that should stick. And in terms of agile working, remote working, these sorts of calls where people do not have to drive into a single location to have meetings, clearly all have added value, both in terms of time, but also those reduced emissions as well. We are looking at the council buildings. We've made reductions over the years, but again, the opportunity that the pandemic has given is to identify, can we go further? And many organisations are adopting new home working policies. The council is in the process of reviewing and consulting with the trade unions in relation to its agile working policy. And it may well be that we do not need the number or the size of the buildings that we currently operate out of, therefore, again, reducing the emissions from our civic functions. New schools, we've committed that new schools and any future civic buildings would be built to net zero carbon standard. I'm really pleased to see recently Welsh Government also commit to that, and also commit to any additional funding that would be required to achieve that aim in terms of the upfront capital cost. And that's something that we'll be looking to embed with the first new school projects under that umbrella. I've mentioned about further decarbonising the street lighting network, and there's additional finances being put into the council budget for the financial year 21-22, which would allow us to continue to do that. And we will continue to invest in solar panels and battery storage for council housing, and are exploring the opportunity of the energy aggregation model to potentially capture and then trade that surplus energy that's produced. We've got approval from Cabinet to construct the first of our solar farms, which we are working towards bringing to conclusion shortly, and we're looking at exploring other opportunities. The commitment in terms of offsetting, not just through tree cover, but also other biodiversity measures, and perhaps reinstatement of some of the biodiversity opportunities that have been lost over the years. And again, looking at really the big ticket items around Dragon Energy Island, building on the work around the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, and whether that can be brought to fruition. Pleased to see in the last week Welsh Government launching its Marine Energy Challenge. We'll be contributing and inputting into that, and hopefully that will result finally in the delivery of the lagoon in Swansea. And the continuation in terms of the commitment to purchase from renewable sources. So last couple of slides, it just really hopefully have set out some of the things that have been achieved and some of the targets going forward, and really just demonstrating that the council should be really leading by example. We've just concluded a consultation process, and we had just over 1,000 responses, which for a council public consultation exercise is pretty good going. Interestingly, there were about 40%, about 400 of those responses were from employees, which again is really good, given that we were trying to get a mix of responses both internally from the council and from the public. And we had a lot of business responses and organisational responses as well. So we'll be capturing and setting those out and then circling that and publishing the results and how that influences some of the proposed actions. Our members, our cabinet, have made a commitment and made a pledge in terms of that public show of support, in terms of how can we as a council support this, but also we're looking at setting up this pledge wall idea where individuals or organisations or businesses can do something similar, however small that might be. And that's one of the things that we're looking to potentially roll out following this afternoon session, and whether partner organisations, both at PSB level and elsewhere, would also be able to support those sort of common themes and those common aims, even though the actions we may, as organisations, be taking may vary across our different partners. And really continue with that citizen engagement and making sure we engage with young people, businesses and the third sector. I think I've covered sort of the main blocks of that. You know, we see Swansea being an important part, as in the council being an important part, but clearly needs to work with a range of partners, and will do so in any way it can to be able to achieve the objectives. And really it's about that balanced approach and that collaborative working, hence the session with the PSB this afternoon, because I'm hopeful and optimistic that you all have similar views in terms of this. This is a long-term process, not something that's going to happen overnight. I mentioned the targets both of 2030 and 2050, and how do we sort of, as an organisation and as a group of organisations, empower and enable those actions. In terms of the short-term opportunities, hopefully covered those pretty well so far. But really, you know, the question for this afternoon is, you know, is there scope for us to work collaboratively as a public service board in terms of this approach? Are we as a PSB committed to the similar principles? And are there any specific areas the PSB would like to see us working together on? I think we're all looking at the same aims and objectives, but hopefully there may be some discrete areas. And I know this has already happened with some of these activities previously, but sort of harnessing that and trying to capture those key areas as part of the forward programme and making sure we have the opportunity to share best practice, but also any lessons learned that I'm sure we've all experienced in terms of this agenda. Thank you very much. There's an email address at the end, which is part of the presentation. If you've got any queries that we're unable to answer this afternoon, by all means, you can link in directly and we'll be happy to follow up and have any further conversations. Hopefully that's okay. Very, very quick run through and quite a bit of work. Sorry, probably took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but happy to try and answer any questions if you've got any.
Thank you, Martin, and that was very comprehensive. And I know, as lead cabinet member, the amount of work Sorry, there's a bit of feedback, I think, a bit of an echo going on. Yeah, there's an incredible amount of work going on as a local authority, but as you rightly say, we can't do this in isolation. So I'm very grateful to you for bringing the presentation to the Public Service Board. I can see Roger's got a question. I'll bring you in, Roger.
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Martin. Really comprehensive overview there of the work that's going on. And as a Swansea resident, I wasn't aware of a lot of things going on, so really encouraging. So, and hats off to you and your team for some fantastic work there. I just wondered, and it's perhaps timely as well, that we have Midrin Harris, who's on the line with us today. He's going to do a presentation on Operation Dance Glow. Rain Dance, which talks around what we've done, and I won't steal his thunder, sort of collaboratively around reducing arson and grass fires and the like. I just wonder, given the impact of grass fires, and have you considered in and around, and as our forestry gets impacted in terms of arson as well, and then the reduction, obviously, in carbon capture for that. Have you considered that as part of the plan as well? And I think perhaps there's an opportunity, and there's a bit. The pitch today was around collaborative working. Perhaps we could have closer ties with your strategy at a local level as well. Just something to consider, maybe.
Absolutely, no, it hadn't been captured up until you mentioned it now. We're obviously looking at other, I guess, forms of mitigation from tree loss. So big one for us at the moment, like many others, is ash dieback. We're losing a significant proportion of our tree cover as a result of that. So we are coming up with alternatives in terms of we will have a new tree policy, tree strategy, which will set out areas across the whole of the city and county of Swansea, which on council land, which we will be able to identify as suitable for tree planting and or reforestation. So there may be an opportunity to look to try and have that across all partners with land holdings which are unsuitable for other purposes, and sort of commit to, you know, at least replace what we're losing. Obviously mitigate losing it in the first place as far as is possible, but in some cases, as you said, with fires or with ash dieback, it's not always possible. But I think that would be more than happy to work with colleagues in terms of how we can explore those opportunities.
Thanks, Martin. Sian?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Really, really helpful and comprehensive. And I think you've probably done what I will need to be doing over the next couple of months as we're sort of emerging out of COVID, because we've got lots of bits of work going on in pockets. But what we haven't yet done is to pull it together into an overall response for the health board. So we have, for example, got a solar farm at Morriston. We are doing work with the National Botanic Gardens about sort of improving environment. We are doing bits of work around procuring electric vehicles, for example, and we have just been allocated £3 million from Welsh Government to support decarbonisation in 21-22. So we've got lots of work going on in pockets. What we haven't done is to develop it into an overall strategy for the health board. And actually, I'll probably be picking your brains on that as we try and pick that in the next couple of months. I suppose in terms of the areas that are the big issues for us at the moment that I think it would be helpful to work on, and it may be that there are some groups going on in this area, but it might be about how we refocus some of the thinking around that. Obviously, for us, sustainable travel. One of the things that we are really trying to think about is we know that people accessing NHS facilities, that's one of the biggest causes of people travelling around the area. So how do we maximise and change our service models based on what we've learned in COVID? So that's one of the things that we're doing. But when people do need to come to us, how can we have sustainable travel? I know there are various groups, but I think there's more that we need to do about that. And the other area then, I suppose, is about use of the estate. Potentially, how can we use our estate across the partners more effectively? And that, whilst that doesn't directly impact on climate change and decarbonisation, I think actually that's something that we could look at together. So that's great. Thanks ever so much, Martin.
Can I just come back on a couple of those points? Thanks, Sian. Really helpful. I think there are a couple of opportunities there. One is around, you know, we're all buying stuff. We're all procuring activities. So this isn't just about buying solar panels or buying batteries. there are opportunities perhaps through some shared procurement. And I know, there'll be an arrangement within the NHS different than the public sector, but we do very often share those frameworks and tap into them. But if we are going out and looking to procure something that might align with this agenda, vehicles, for example, there is no harm whatsoever in saying, look, we are doing this, and there's an opportunity to share that and for us to collectively look to procure that. So we're doing it once for all of us rather than all doing it separately. So again, that offers there, if there's anything we're doing that you think would help, more than happy to for you to be able to tap in, more than happy to share, all of the learning and experiences that we've gone through, because sometimes it's about not making the mistakes we've made as well, rather than just saying we've done everything perfectly. So happy to do that. The sustainable travel one is absolutely fundamental. It's one that clearly has to have all big partners and big employers. And in a former life, before we started all the COVID discussion, Sean, we were having a major employers forum where we were talking about a sustainable transport policy. So that's one of the underpinning principles that we will all need as employers, but also we will need to enable in terms of the wider use. So, I think that's, if it was an area we need to take forward and prioritise, that's one of them. And on the use of the estate, not as directly related to this, but clearly has opportunities both in terms of decarbonisation, the discussion we just had on tree cover and other offsetting opportunities, possible solar farms, etc. And interestingly, I believe Jeff Bacon is hoping to come to one of our future PSBs and update colleagues on the work that the local property board has been doing since it was set up by the PSB many years ago around shared use of assets. And perhaps this is a slightly different focus of sharing the assets in a different way. And finally, if you can let us know how you managed to get £3 million out of Welsh Government for your decarbonisation agenda, then I'd be more than happy to chat through that as well.
It's all ours.
Thank you, Martin. And Sean, it sounds hugely positive, so thank you for that. A lot of common issues there that we can certainly collaborate on. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Martin, and thank you, Chair. Martin, I get the real sense of commitment coming through there from your voice and the tone and the slides, really. And I think two of them captured it particularly well, that kind of Venn diagram showing the interconnectedness with the net zero approach in the middle. That shows how interconnected and integrated this all needs to be, and that's where the PSB's footprint should be, isn't it? And I get your point. That was a really powerful slide about everybody needs to act. So it's not just the authority or others showing the lead. We need to bring, or sometimes, the public will sometimes lead us on this, and we'll be behind, sometimes we'll be in front, and we need to recognise both those push-pulls operating, because both are equally helpful, I think, in this, given the challenges we've got. Yeah, in terms of the questions, I mean, one of them is whether we're following the same principles, your questions in your last slide. And the one about that strikes me a discussion we've got going on in our organisation. I mean, around, you mentioned recycling levels, for example. We could be all really good, and your authority could be top of the tree on recycling, but we could still be putting more into that system. So that's what's turned a circular economy, where you're recycling what you're consuming. But if you're still consuming as much, if not more, of those very materials that are damaging, then we're not really addressing what we would call a more of a regenerative economy, where instead of use, reuse, and then landfill, the stuff that you put in the first instance can be reused multiple times before and hopefully never. It just doesn't have any, it doesn't get landfilled. So there's a difference in approaches there that we perhaps need to explore. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you offline about this, but on that kind of circular economy stuff, you bang on the measures there, really. I just wonder on the cycle one, because this predict and provide of roads, that's been, historically what we've done in the past, but the provision of alternatives in terms of other modes of travel, that increase in the cycle network, lends itself then to, instead of predict and provide the alternative, and then promote the alternative as a way of getting that step change. Have you seen a kind of increase in the use of those new cycling networks that you provided? Because I was looking at charts this morning of the use of mountain bike routes in Avon, or Forest Estate in Avon. There was a spike of a four-fold increase in the summer months last year of mountain bikers. So that's 4 times the amount, 160,000 mountain bike users all over Avon Forest last year. That's 4 times the amount of normal. So that's the COVID effect, which we hope to push forward really. But I just wonder whether you're sensing that same thing too.
Yeah, and I can see Councillor Lewis nodding. Yes, we have. I can't recall the figures, but I know when we were sharing this with Council not so long ago, there are stats which identify the increase in usage, which I'd be more than happy to share and provide. And that's part of the evidence that's used in terms of submission for the grant claims to Welsh Government, who have very heavily supported this. We're not there yet, and there's still some challenges in terms of cycle networks and shared use, etc. But I think, to be fair to Welsh Government, they've got a really strong commitment to it. I think our challenge is probably now joining up the cycle network with the wider network, because it needs to be as much about access to work as it is about recreational cycling, and that's where certainly Welsh Government have been pushing their funding and their priorities. So it's probably making sure the cycle network has to interconnect with, you know, park and ride and park and cycle and other opportunities, rather than a cycle network in itself. So I think that's where the overall metro concept and sustainable travel plan is absolutely crucial, because many people who work in Swansea don't live in Swansea and therefore can't cycle to work. But we need to find a way that they can still be as sustainable as they can by perhaps coming in on public transport and then accessing the cycle network. And I think our facilities have got to change. And unfortunately, you know, it's not within our control entirely. We need public transport providers to change the way in which they adopt those plans, and hopefully post-COVID there'll be a bit more of an opportunity to influence that, and Welsh Government should be able to influence them as well. So yes, there has been an increase. We can get the numbers, but I think we can continue to do a lot more, particularly around that travel to work, as well as the travel for recreational purposes as well.
Martin?
Can I sneak one more quick one? I should have said that NRW's got a plan for our renewal plan coming out of COVID, and I should have said, and I will, our plan is to capture and continue the pattern of working at home as a default. So we've flipped completely over from being an office-based organisation to being a home-based one. So we'll continue that probably for the next year. So that will drive opportunities rather for being home-based and site-based, with some very agile kind of hub-based approaches to meetings, making meetings shorter and at different sites. So we could end up rocking up at one of your offices for a short meeting. And I need to share that renewal plan with you to see what opportunities there will be for us sharing office space, and because we'll be probably reducing our office space footprint across the patch.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, indulge your second question there.
That's actually you know, a very interesting opportunity, especially that Welsh Government are pushing us towards more community hubs, more, you know, agile spaces which are closer to people's homes, so that they don't go into the office, as it were. They go into a community base. So I think we've been having these discussions. They are ongoing. Communication with our workforce is key. You know, it needs to be a blended approach. It's not going to be a one size fits all, but at the same time, we want to reduce travel and reduce carbon footprint, and make workspace more, you know, easily accessible for people as well. So that's going to be key. So that's really good. So I can't see anyone else indicating. And there's 2 asks really that I can see from today. One is, we'd really be delighted if PSB partners sign up to the Climate Change Charter. I'm not sure whether that's feasible to do from this meeting. I'm sure you'll have to go back to your respective boards and ask them for endorsement, but it would be great to see PSB partners signing up to that. As Martin has outlined in his presentation, it's not about signing up to our action plan, it's signing up to the fact that you will be developing your own action plans, but we really welcome the opportunities to see where overlaps are and then expand on those so that we can all benefit. So Martin, I don't know whether springing from that, there'll be some sort of task and finish group or an action planning group, because, you know, we'll need to be having those conversations and linking up.
Yes, that would be my view, Andrea. I think, you know, I'm happy to do it in any way, but the logical starting point is if there's somebody within each of your organisations who would be the people to make that initial contact with, I'd be happy to make those initial links and set up that discussion. And then perhaps once we've had a chance to debate some of these points and come up with some priority areas to work together on over the next perhaps couple of months, come back with a further update to the PSB to say, look, this is how we think we want to take this forward. So that's the offer. If you want to pass the sort of contact names across, and we'd be happy to share any of the documentation or any of the links and vice versa. So that'd be really helpful.
That's great. So if members want to coordinate either through Leanne, Leanne can pass your details or your representative of your organisation through to Martin, and then we'll make those links. And then if you can sign up to the charter, that would be fantastic. So thank you very much, Martin. Very thought-provoking. Arson wasn't one that had come to mind. We thought we'd covered everything, but that's exactly why this meeting is so important, because there will be areas that we haven't thought of, and there will be areas that we can collaborate on and work together on. So appreciate that, Roger. Thank you for that. And Sian, I'm sure we'd be delighted to support you on your journey as well, and share any learning that we've got to help with that sort of overarching organisational approach, that overarching strategy, because I know Martin particularly has put a huge amount of time and effort into this. And in fairness, I think, Martin, we started on this journey 2015, before climate emergency was ever really a thought, isn't it? So we've been on this journey for quite some time, reducing carbon and greening fleets, LED lighting, etc., etc. But this has really given us an opportunity to really focus and make sure that it's all coordinated, and then one part of the organisation doesn't rub up against the other part of the organisation, and that it's all coordinated towards tackling climate change. So thank you very much, Martin, for your attendance. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but I'm sure you've got other meetings, as I know how busy you are, but you're welcome if you want to stay. So thank you for that. I move on then to Paul Thomas, and item 7 is County Lines, Substance Misuse, Antisocial Behaviour, Safer Swansea Partnership, High Street. So no mean agenda there really, Paul. And I know that the last meeting, unfortunately, we ran out of time. So I'm pleased to see it's higher up on the agenda today. So without any further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start with some good news to follow up from the presentation that I did for you last time. Is that planning consent has been agreed and contractors are now on site with regard to the refurbishment of the empty premises at the top of the High Street in Dabati. So we have started working with the community with regard to shaping what that engagement will look like. And we've had a number of volunteers that have come forward through Matthew House, as well as some other engagement, to help shape and design what that engagement will look like for the community. So this is very much about the community taking ownership and driving this forward to enable to shape then what we can use that space for, above and beyond what I will probably pick up on very briefly through the discussion that I'm going to have with you this afternoon. I suppose there's a huge caveat that I need to sort of put in place before I launch into the update, in as much as I am not the subject matter expert. So I think that if you really do need to have more detail with regard to substance misuse and service provision, or county lines and sort of the police activity, and maybe the PPU and our children's services and the involvement they've got with young people, then I'd suggest that you could probably consider that going forward if you felt that there was a need for more information. So I can give an overview, and I can give you some of the lived experiences that the Safer Swansea Partnership are having at this time with regard to substance misuse, county lines, and the general sort of look and feel of the High Street. So I suppose if I pick up the county lines, I think everyone knows what county lines is, and we're aware that there are a number of lines that operate in Swansea. We treat any young people involved in county lines activity as victims, because inevitably they have been either exploited, trafficked, or a number of those outcomes have affected these young people in their lives. There have been a number of drug warrants carried out in and around Matthew Street and at the top of High Street. There continues to be intelligence gathering and stop and search work that is ongoing. Alongside that, there are posters placed within Matthews Street and Griffiths John Street and the High Street, so the community are aware that police will be undertaking undercover work. There's been some excellent partnership working going on with South Wales Police, with housing, with the NSU, with Rangers and the High Street Ranger, with regard to just signposting and raising awareness of certain issues and risks that we may have in the area, be it through the built environment or through individuals who are being targeted because of their vulnerability. And that has been highlighted particularly well with the joint patrols that are going on between police and the NSU. That has brought to the attention of key partners some quite significant risk and vulnerabilities of young people who are clearly being exploited by those that want to use them and use their property to undertake county line activity. And I think probably just to share with you how stark this is and real this is, that in light of COVID and travel restrictions and lockdowns, recently 2 teenagers gave addresses from Essex when they were involved in this activity. So, you know, the questions here is that how are these young people, you know, and these are young teenagers arriving here in Swansea. So there's a lot more work that we need to do with British Transport Police, with Network Rail, to raise more awareness of, you know, what these young people are doing on these trains and some of the vulnerabilities they have. Those young people are now being worked with our youth services. But that just gives you a really example of, even though we are in lockdown and lots of people are complying with the restrictions and have been, that there are still young people from as far afield as Essex appearing in flats in Davati. With regard to the substance misuse, the good news is that throughout COVID and with the lockdown restrictions, the outreach work has continued on High Street. And I think that's been critical because of some of the people there that lead chaotic lives and have underlying issues with regard to substance misuse, be that drug, be that alcohol, or a combination of both. The Swan project, which is led by Women's Aid, have still appeared on the High Street 4 nights a week, working from the van. And I think one of the key drivers for us to look at a change of use for some of the premises at the top of High Street was maybe to offer a safer and more secure environment for that outreach and engagement work during the evenings to be done in a warm and more welcoming environment. So that's one of the services that we rather hope will work out of those premises once they are ready to go. The important thing from that engagement work is that they're seeing between 10 and 20 sex workers of an evening, and those are the ones that are willing to engage with the van. There is a needle exchange on that vehicle. There's also a sexual health nurse that will be on that vehicle, and there's bloodborne virus testing, which is done once a month. So, you know, we are taking services to those people that may struggle through their chaotic lives, through whatever other pressures they have in their lives, to actually access and be able to access services. So I think in a small scale way that there is an opportunity here to expand on taking some of those services to these most vulnerable people. The other great news is that from that engagement, six sex workers have engaged in the RAPS program, which is the Rapid Access Prescribing Service run by Devodal. And for those of you who maybe not aware, is that normally Devodal will provide that sort of single integrated approach to substance misuse for those that have been through the criminal justice system. But what we identified probably over a year ago was that there was some underspend. And so what we can now do is signpost some of our most high risk individuals to access RAPs that may not have been through the criminal justice system. And the great news here is that we've got 6 young people now on prescription, and 3 of their partners have also had access to that. So it's a really good example of how perhaps, you know, an integrated public health approach to this service provision does work on a small scale, and how we need to maybe consider how that looks in that broader and larger service provision. Because I think what we have found is that some of the services that work with those with substance misuse, clients are presented obviously with COVID, so there's been a challenge here as to how they continue to engage with the most vulnerable here, with also then being compliant and vigilant with some of those restrictions and distancing that they need to do. I think maybe there's a consideration to think about the pharmacies and what we call needle exchanges, because there is very much an issue here about people going in and just handing in a needle and leaving the needle without any form of sort of formal engagement or harm reduction advice. And what we are seeing is that there is still drug paraphernalia being found on our streets and in particular areas, which can be linked back to particular pharmacies. So I know that some of the services there are working with health to look at how they can maybe change that, so there is more of that engagement and harm reduction discussions than literally an exchange where one is given and one is taken from some of the service users. I know there's been some plainclothes operations done by police, and that is really just to gain the trust and build those relationships with these sex workers, because behind all of this there is clearly criminal activity and sadly domestic violence. And I know that we work very closely with the leads in Vouda, and we've signposted a number of these young people through to the sex worker Marak, the SWAT there, for them to access additional support services that they desperately need. And I suppose the other piece of good news is that with working with the police here, we've developed an ASARA actually for the high street. Now the ASARA is a problem-solving action plan that's developed by the police, and in the past that it's been very much done by the police, and then they have then come to other partners to sort of say, well, we're trying to address certain issues and risks and vulnerabilities here, can you help? Well, with regard to the high street, because we've had these work streams that came from the critical incident group, what we've been able to do is for the first time partners to become actively involved in the development of that ASARA. So in effect, there is a partnership approach now embedded in that action plan, and that should help then inform how we address pretty much all that I've discussed with you just here in that broad overview. So, you know, the Swan Project and Women's Aid were part of that development of the ASARA. I know housing and the NSU have contributed to that, and community safety as well. So I think that once that is finalised and signed off by the various people that need to do that, that will in effect become our action plan that we take forward on the high street. But I think that just gives you just some sort of idea and a broad overview of some of the activity. It's not all bad. When we did the initial conversation about getting a commitment from the community to be part of this, you know, we've had some really good and interesting conversations with people. They're very keen to be part of this. The local businesses would want to see this, and we see this as, with regard to the empty properties, as a catalyst for that to help improve the upper high street, which lends itself then to the terrific work that's going to go on in the Palace Theatre and Matthew Street and the Cross Street and the refurbishment there. So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I could go on more, but just the one thing that I would touch on before finishing is that obviously there's the PSPO that has, the consultation has been out, it's closed. There's the report that's being written at the moment, but that is not to say that we are not going to start work on the second tunnel, the shorter tunnel on High Street, to improve the look and feel and security of that anyway. So whatever the outcome of the PSPO is, we have funding in place to be able to improve that with regard to lighting and the general look and feel of the street furniture and realm there. Okay.
Thank you, Paul. Clearly, you know, a huge amount of work going on at the top of High Street and many, many partners involved in that. Does anybody have any questions for Paul? I can't see anybody indicating, but it was a very comprehensive. Oh, I've got Adam.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. I was just going to see if there are any others. Just to say that obviously the CSP needs to report regularly through to the PSB. So there'll be a regular slot moving forwards for Paul and you know, his small team perhaps to attend. But also about the APB also needs to report through the CSP to here, and just need to make sure we've got that governance so that those reports flow through. So just to explain why he's here again, and you'll see him on a regular basis.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And in addition, obviously, we have got the integrated approach to tackling substance misuse and reducing substance misuse related deaths across the Bay region. So this will all tie in together. And I know there's a piece of work going on in the background at the moment to discover what that board looks like. That's going to be the steering group that drives that. But it's important that we make sure it's all interconnected. And no work is going on in isolation. So I'm sure that piece of work will be happening. So thank you very much for the update, Paul. That was very comprehensive. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Midrian. Thank you. Welcome, Midrian. You're going to tell us about Operation Dawn's Glow 2021. So over to you.
Chair, could I just jump in just to introduce Midrian, if possible, if that's okay with you?
Absolutely.
And it was really just to provide a little bit of context and background, and not to steal Midrian's thunder, because I think, a really fantastic example of collaborative working with really positive outcomes for all partners as well. And nicely tied into Martin's presentation as well. I think there's a real synergy there that I know Midrian is very keen to get on board and to assist there as well. But yeah, a little bit of a history lesson really. When I joined the fire service some 25 years ago now, we were very much a response-based organisation, and you know, we trained and we responded to incidents really effectively, as we always do, and we still do. But it was very much, like I say, we waited around and we went to those incidents and did what we needed to do. Part of that was based on some of the sort of funding mechanisms at the time, a perverse incentive really, in that chief fire officers' budgets were set on the number of incidents that they went to. So no real incentive to reduce that. That changed a lot some 20 years ago, and as a result of that, the prevention model that a fantastic example we'll see today really sprouted up, and we've really grasped that. And some of the figures you'll see are startling in terms of the reduction, the impact that this not only prevention work has had, but I think we now moved from response into prevention, and our third phase really is collaboration. So it really is a joined up approach. We like to sort of say take the lead and pull things together, but it is very much a multi-agency approach. And I thought the benefit of the presentation here today will really show partners, and I know we've struggled, a number of us have struggled in terms of getting collaborative ventures off the ground, and that's been a challenge for all of us. But I think this is a real a beacon and a shining light in terms of collaborative working. So at that point I'll hand over to Midrian and leave you in his safe hands.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Chair, as well, and thanks to everyone for allowing me the time this afternoon to give an insight into Operation Dawn's Glow. And I'm mindful I've got the boss watching me today now, so I'm going to have to be on my best behaviour in terms of some of the extracts we'll have for the presentation. So thank you, Roger. Right, I'll just share my screen. I think probably it'd be easier if I do that, and I can just canter through the presentation. Okay, so in terms of the task force then, so just to give you an overview, have I lost that? Oh, beg your pardon, I just lost the screen.
We could see it, Midrian.
I disappeared.
It's gone now.
Right. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, set on slide. Okay. Right, okay, so in terms of the task force, what I'm going to discuss with you today, 2015, most of you probably realise the significant amount of grass fires along the South Wales valleys. That drew a lot of attention, political attention. During that year, it was a very dry year as well, and as a result of that, the Welsh Government held a grass fire summit down in Cardiff, and questions were asked about where was the focus on deliberate grass fires within Wales. There were, fire services were actively involved with trying to prevent these deliberate grass fires, but what was quite clear in the mandate from Welsh Government at the time was that we needed a definitive focus on reducing deliberate grass fires across Wales. So on the basis of that, they resurrected the Strategic Arson Reduction Board, or SARB as we call it, and the chair is Roger Thomas, who's with us today. And they were tasked then with setting out some form of task force to look at the issue across Wales and how could we best address the issues which were popping up either through the urban areas or even in the rural farming areas as well. Can you still see the presentation or not?
Yes, it's still with us.
Right. Okay, I can't see it here, so I've lost my thread at the moment, unfortunately.
It's still on your main page, it is, Midrian.
Oh, right, okay, okay. Obviously some IT issues here. Okay, so in terms of bringing it into context then, so 2016 was the first year then of creating a multi-agency task force, and you've seen from the front slide there a number of the partners which work with us, and they're involved in the day-to-day discussions that we have on the matter of grass fires in Wales. So my involvement is in terms of my role. So my role is the Corporate Head of Prevention and Protection within Mid West Wales Fire and Rescue Service. So I oversee predominantly the community safety matters and business fire safety matters for the whole of Mid West Wales. With that portfolio, I'm also the chair of the Joint Arson Group for Wales, and I report the delivery of arson prevention into the strategic board, of which I've just mentioned now, which Roger chairs. As part of that portfolio as well, I lead on the task force activity, which I'm going to cover with you at this moment. And following up on what Roger mentioned in terms of deliberate fires in Wales, so this is just a bit of an insight into the total figures for deliberate fires in Wales. And if you look back to 2003-04 on the left side of your screen, you'll see that in terms of deliberate fires within Wales and what was recorded, just short of 30,000 deliberate fires recorded, and the accidentals were hovering around 7,000 to 8,000 per year across Wales. Now bring that up to 2020, or certainly 2018-19, and going into 2020, we're hovering around 6,000 deliberate fires recorded by fire services in Wales, and the accidental around 5,000, and they've stayed quite stable. And again, to put into context what Roger's mentioned in terms of where fire services were and the influences on and the focus on prevention, you can see how the intervention by fire services across Wales in terms of schools education, youth engagement programmes and other fire sector programmes, amongst a range of others, how that started to influence behaviours and activities across Wales. And I'll come on to some of the engagement activities that we're involved with later on. So if you focus on grass fires are that's what's dominating this conversation this afternoon. And to give you some perspective, between 2015 and 2020, so 2015 was a catalyst year for grass fires across Wales, and these can range from a small lawn fire in the centre of Swansea, maybe started deliberately by somebody, right through to your large protracted incidents, which you're seeing in the photos on the right hand side. And we all know when they start to get protracted, then there's a lot of activity both by fire services, multi-agency partners and a lot of others, both in just tackling and resolving the situation, and probably longer term then in trying to recover the damage that's been caused. So you can see 2015 in the top left hand box, and moving across in the different years. 2018 is a good example of where weather has a huge influence. 2018, July in particular, what you found was we had an absolute heat wave in 2018, and those figures there, the circa 3,500 that you're seeing for 2018, in amongst them, some 1,000 of them came about during that month of July, and that was set about by the hot weather that we had. Small grass fires were extending and getting much larger and creating much more damage. Now, as you can see, then going into 2020 was a strange year for us, probably the same for everybody else with lockdown. Fire services in Wales, typically deliver around 70,000 messages to schools, children, young people across Wales every year. Certainly Mid West Wales Fire Service, across the 6 counties, we deliver just over 40,000 messages to children and young people, and we would target schools and individual groups within the hotspot areas, is what we call them. And again, we couldn't manage to do that last year because of the limitations we had. But we looked at other engagement methods, relied heavily on our partners, looking at NRW with Martin here, attending today. He was in the eyes and ears of NRW, the police, etc. So again, last year is quite strange for us. So bringing it back a bit more local then to Mid West Wales. So you can see over the years that we're hovering around 600 to 700 deliberate fires recorded, and anything between 200 and 400 accidental. And we are seeing probably more of a trend heading towards accidental, and that's what we'd like to see, if I'm honest with you, as opposed to the record of deliberate. And we'll come on to the detail in a second. We, as a multi-agency task force and a range of partners, which we meet on a regular basis, certainly within this, what we call the grass fire season. We met actually yesterday on the conference call, multi-agency again, and we bring together all the data of the activity, what's happened over the last over the Easter period, and we look at hotspots and trends and underlying factors that we can look at it. And again, in terms of the conversations we're having, this is a typical type of public access data that we can utilise to show, certainly during the height of grass fires across Wales, in terms of the visual presence that the grass fires have. And you can see some of the data there, looking at 2020 in terms of the land fire damage assessment. And it's quite striking when you actually put all those small grass fires together and the amount of area that it's actually covering and damaging going forward. And looking back at the previous conversation we had right at the start with Martin Nichols as well, and I fully agree with Roger on this in so much that the carbon reduction commitment and the air quality conversations are what we're having. And when you've got a couple of thousand hectares of mountainside being deliberately set on fire, whether it's by antisocial behaviour, by off-roading, by habitat destruction, whatever you want to call it, then if that's sitting within your boundaries as a local authority, then potentially there's conversation to be had there about, can that be a feature of a reduction approach going forward? And again, more than happy to pick up this conversation with Martin Nichols outside this presentation. And again, Met Office is a big part of what we do, and this is probably going to be quite obvious for everybody, because this is just to give you an insight into when the weather, certainly with the air temperature, picks up, there's a correlation there with grass fires as well. Interestingly, you're going to start seeing a pattern, a bit of a sine wave actually, looking around March, April into May, and you'll see that pattern every year. And naturally, we'll akin it to a change in the weather forecast. There'll be others saying that, well, this is probably the Easter holidays where children and young people are out and about, and there's probably more prevalence for antisocial behaviour and everything that goes with that. Interestingly, for the larger land managers and landowners, there are very prescribed dates which they can work within to burn in a controlled way, so the vegetation that they've got, and that's usually between the 1st of October and the 31st of March. But naturally, you have a wet autumn, a wet winter, a wet going into the February, March time where it's constantly wet. When you come into the April time, which is beyond the deadline date, the weather changes. We've got a bit of light wind, a bit of sunshine. There's an innate pressure on the landowner and farming community that they still need to burn, and they will burn beyond that. Now, what we're trying to do as a task force is trying to change that attitude and trying to keep those behaviours within the prescribed time limits. It gives us a clearer indication as the Fire and Rescue Service, gives us a clearer insight as to what we can do in those locations for intervention and supporting them and creating fire breaks. Because what we find is when you start encroaching into the April, May months, and we know seasons change, the chances of those small fires expanding into something much more radical is a real threat to us. And this is why a huge amount of engagement over the last 18 months is where we're trying to unpick and declutter the messages going out into the farming community. Looking at, again, bringing in rainfall, and you can see obviously where there's less rainfall with the yellow bar, the greater the activity, and you can see there for April 2015. Interestingly, when you look at July 2018, we had more fires, grass fires reported, and which occurred and responded to across Wales, and of these circa 1,800, you can see 1,800 there, which were captured in totality across Wales. So weather has a huge impact on that, and the Met Office relationship that we've got really crucial to our 3-4 day predictions, and certainly going into periods like the Easter holidays. Not to bring focus on Swansea, this is just to give you a snapshot of the type of data we have. So this is just typical incident data. It's just mapping data, which everybody will be familiar with. And we're able to then overlay that with some more topography. And interestingly, for some areas, I'm sure if I zoomed in there, you'd probably be able to pick out particular locations where there's common land, etc., or large estates, mountainsides, and so on. But the important thing with this slide is that where we are striving for as a multi-agency group, and we've got a lot of trust, a lot of information sharing happening, is our aspiration is that I'd be able to show this slide to you and show, right, this is the deliberate fire slide. We put an overlay on top of that. This is the antisocial behaviour, police crime type of overlay on that. This is something from maybe the local authorities in terms of fly tipping. And this is where we have habitat destruction. This is where the top risk sites are for example, NRW. And hopefully then, as a multi-agency collective, we can just zoom in on hotspot areas where there is a prevalence for fly tipping, there is a prevalence for antisocial behaviour, there is a prevalence for deliberate fire setting, and the list goes on. So then you can make best use of the resources you've got for one targeted area and probably have a bigger impact there. And that's the aspiration we have, certainly during this year, with the relationships we've got in data sharing. Excuse me. So what is Operation Damsel? Well, translated, it means rain dance, and quite a fitting name. And so you can, I've just covered the when did it start? It started in spring 2015. The resurrection of the board, which Roger chairs, and sets the strategy, of which Martin Jones, beg your pardon, he also sits on that board. In terms of the joint RC group as well, which I chair, and we've got a range of partners here, and the list is not exhaustive. There's many more to add to that. Good examples: national parks, Brecon Beacons, Pembrokeshire National Parks, and again, if you can imagine the conversations we've had this week in terms of, still predominantly in lockdown, more individuals having staycations, more use of our public parks, etc. And we can start building the intelligence knowledge then about activities out in the community, and where best do we think we can put some patrols out there, signboards out there, pushing the drone into the air to get an understanding of the landscape prior to burning or after burning, etc. And we can do a huge amount with that network of individuals which are all signed up and all committed to reducing deliberate grass fires across Wales. And again, the last point there is we do have a strategy. It's just been refreshed now. And again, 5 very clear priority areas, of which land management and safeguarding that going into the future is a big part of that, overlapping into the climate improvement, of which we want to focus more on. I think I've covered what Damsel does in terms of the multi-agency approach and the dedicated focus on grass fires in Wales. We've clearly looked at the root causes of why these fires occur, and again, if I'm honest with you, we've probably moved away from it's predominantly caused by children and young people, antisocial behaviour. Having said that, the conference call yesterday, the triggers were quite a lot of youth gatherings, and that was some of the hotspots areas that we had. But we are trying to dispel this situation of it's not all down to children and young people. And when you've got a mountainside on fire where there's absolutely no house around for many miles, and we know there's no public footpaths there, there's no access by members of the public there, you tend to have this understanding that it's maybe done by somebody else who wants the benefit of that, which is the landowner, the land manager, etc. And that in itself is very complex, because we do know there's pockets of land owned by people which don't live local, they don't have control of that land. And again, this is why I'm trying to bring focus using Welsh Government, using land registry to identify landholders, and hopefully bring it to their attention about what parameters they can undertake these activities, and make them very clear about any particular codes which are out there about when they can't burn. Engaging with partners, I've covered that, and I'm probably glossing over a lot of the great work we're doing, but I'm conscious of the time that we've got and the important agenda you have. Again, in terms of interventions, it can be face-to-face engagement, it can be school talks, it can be going into the farming community, farmers markets, it can be having bringing PCSOs, neighbourhood policing into fire stations and briefing them on activities to look out for. Is link it in with waste enforcement and others such as NRW, and we look at CADU in terms of the heritage properties as well, and any signs they're picking up about visitors and maybe some fire setting going on in those locations. And again, it's pulling all that information together to make some form of consensus about where we need to target our focus on. I've covered the sharing of the information, and again, in terms this year, we've just moved the communication strategies to a whole new level. If you go onto the Mid West Wales Fire and Rescue Services website, it's dominated by the focus on deliberate grass fires in Wales. We've got a dedicated task force page as well, with a range of resources there setting out what the task force is about, how you can assist, with obviously the communications messages we want to put out on social media and broader. So really a great repository there in terms of all the information in one place that you can cascade out as stakeholders in this within the Public Service Board, should you wish. Okay, going towards the end then. So I think, in terms of the aims and why I'm here, it's an objective of the task force, and it's an objective of where we want to take the awareness of deliberate grass fires in Wales. And that's worked well, and you're not the only I'll just check. Can you still see the presentation? Yeah, I've just lost it off my screen at the moment.
Yes, it's still with us.
Right. Okay. I have to apologise for this. I'm just losing all the. I've just lost completely all the slides. If I cancel that and. Yeah. I know the boss is looking, so I might get a bit hot under the collar now. There we go. So you should be able to see. I'm still on the same slide. There we go.
Together.
And in terms of where we are, it's raising the awareness, and I can imagine, within yourselves, within the reach that you have within the community, maybe grass fires is not a feature of that, but I think the appeal from myself and the task force would be if you've got teams working in the community, and we know what the trends can be like in terms of antisocial behaviour and all the some of the ward information and the strength of of matters within the community. If those individuals are aware of what this is all about, then hopefully that can just keep on pushing that information and trickle it in terms of the wider awareness by the police and ourselves as a fire service and other partners as well. And again, identify local trends, and for us to be able to come to you and say, listen, we know exactly there's a couple of issues that you've got. We do this as a matter of process at the moment, but again, it's making sure that yourselves as strategic leaders are aware of some of the demands being placed on us and how we're trying to mitigate that through a task force arrangement and a wider working within both in Mid West Wales, within Swansea, and certainly within Wales. And I think that the plea for me is to keep up the good communication. We've got really good arrangements with stakeholders within Swansea, and there's a huge list of them. We're really proud of that. We're really proud of the networks we've got. And some of you you'll know about Kilvey Hill and the attention that draws during the weekends and the evenings, during the summer months in particular. We've done a lot of work there, and very grateful through the Public Service Board and through the project pools of money that came from NRW at the end of last year. We've invested that. We were successful in bidding for some of that money. We invested in that, creating fire breaks in Kilvey Hill. And again, the engagement we had when we were creating the fire breaks over the last month was phenomenal. I mean, members of the public were coming to us and saying, we've never managed to get to these particular parts of Kilvey Hill. We can do it now. We can do it safely. That's a double-edged sword, because now you're encouraging more people onto the mountain. But again, for us, it's about protecting the environment, minimising the risk of fire, engaging with the community, and making sure that we progress step by step every year to try and make Kilvey Hill not the hotspot for deliberate fires, but actually a haven and a valuable part of that community to to improve all the environment and the well-being aspect, which we've seen so much of now in encouraging members of the public out into the public domain. So that's effectively the ethos of where we are, and it's just a reach into the Public Service Board then, just for awareness, and obviously if you can spread the word, that'll be fantastic. While this may not be quite in your area, this is just an example of creating a fire break. So we've used a machine, we've contracted a machine, which will come along. And if you look at that picture on the left side, the tall grass that you've got, we've gone alongside there. We've created a fire break. So we've created, we've separated that piece of land, and literally days after, somebody set fire to the land on the right-hand side. And yes, had it not been for that fire break, that would have continued for many hectares thereafter. So there is benefit in that, and I think we've learned a lot about being on the front foot about creating fire breaks. We have done it as a fire rescue service, and again we're appealing again in terms of the effectiveness of things like this to stakeholders about how you can use things like this to try and mitigate and reduce the risk of fire within your particular locations and make it a more pleasant place for everybody. So I'm conscious I've probably rattled through that and probably skirted across the surface, I beg your pardon, and there's a huge amount of work that goes on. Needless to say that anybody's welcome to become involved with us as a joint arson group, and we're very grateful for everybody's assistance with that. There's members within the Public Service Board of Swansea which are part of that. We're very grateful for their continued support with this campaign that we're running, and probably will run indefinitely for the next couple of years. So I'm happy to take any questions, and apologies for the IT glitches as well.
Thank you, Midrian. Fascinating presentation, and it just really does highlight the importance of Operation Dawn's Glow. I know that fire breaks have worked very successfully in foreign countries, particularly hot countries, and as a Swansea resident all my life, I can't think of a year that I've never seen Kilvey Hill on fire. It tends to be an annual thing, and it tends to be one of those things that keeps recurring for some unknown reason. And Kilvey Hill being, as I understand it, one of the largest urban forests in Wales, possibly in the UK. So we really do need to protect it and protect the wildlife that's there as well. So many, many reasons to prevent an early intervention, and I'm sure that our comms team will be happy to link up with you and share any additional information that you've got far and wide, because it's for the benefit of all organisations here today. I'm going to call in your chair, so over to you, Jan.
Yeah, just to say thank you, Mid, for the presentation. It was excellent, and as always, proud of the organisation as chair. It's an organisation that's very close to my heart. Just to say, there was an excellent programme on this week on Coast and Country. I don't know whether everybody saw it. The Damsel team and the work that they would do and so if anybody hasn't seen it, call it back on catch up, and you can see it, everybody concerned.
Thank you, Jan. Okay. I think I've got a question from Adam.
Yeah, no, just an offer really. If again, Paul, who you caught up with earlier, who did the presentation, if you anything on social media, anything around that community safety, if you link in with Paul, we'll make sure that we get it through all of our channels on community safety, and can just help support really in terms of anything that you're doing, whether it's good news, bad news, filter it through, and we'll make sure we promote it for you and get it across all our networks.
Thanks, Adam. Very grateful for that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to reflect on how good an example this is of the need for some significant and sustained focus and investment if you want to really tackle something. And we've seen that on substance misuse and got it on climate and biodiversity. You've got to really go at it and stay at it, because you'll get the wins in the end. We're down now to that kind of hardcore of, dare I say, hotspots where we've got a real problem in certain communities, I think, across the South Wales valleys, where the real ownership of the problem lies in those very communities, because they're the ones who are creating the cost, using taxpayers' money to put fires out consistently, continuously, that could be spent elsewhere. I've made a note of, cost to NRW in the margins of the chat there. but you've done a really brilliant job there. And it shows how that multi-agency approach can, if you all stick at it, really get some things going there. I just put a bit of a shout out as well for Healthy Hillsides project we've got as well, working with the police and fire and rescue service over in pretty much RCT and over there, and that's taking the same approach to managing vegetation, such as to reduce the fire load, and this is on the advice and collaboration with the fire services there. So lots of really good work going on, and a lot of that, at the heart of a lot of that, is the educative approach as well, to try and get into these kind of hard to reach areas, because they're costing their communities money and effort and time that should be put to helping them. So it's opportunity cost as well. But really good stuff. I think he did pretty well there, Roger Midrin, don't you think?
Very much so. Thank you, Martin. Adam, and then Roger.
Thanks. It's sort of a question on the back of the presentation for Martin, really. Just shows how a small amount of money, but not insubstantial, 25k across the board, and the papers are on later under item 12. But is that going to be repeated this year, Martin? And if so, is it going to be repeated earlier so that we've got a bit more time? Because what we've seen is from the presentation how useful that funding was.
Yeah, getting that feedback from Midrin was tremendous as well. If you could jot a quick note to me on that, Midrin, that'd be brilliant, because it would help us. Adam, you got me on the spot here. We are in real problems here. We've had a settlement from Welsh Government that's meant we've reduced our grant and aid budget, but we're fighting hard to ensure that because when we wrote, Andrea, to yourself and Clive, we said that we were making a commitment here to 3 years, and we're trying to do it, but we've had a massive problem with our budget this year. So, this is coming from our grant and aid, which is under the most pressure, but we hope very much to repeat it, Adam. Yeah, because you can see what it's been delivered there. It's really good. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And if we can help Martin with that, from the PSB, perhaps writing in any sport, just get in touch. Happy to support that. Through the chair. Anything that you need, really. Yeah, absolutely. Roger.
Yeah, it's just to re-emphasise, and you're right, Martin. Midrin was as professional as always. Yeah, absolutely, first-class job always. Yeah, it's just in terms of that, that huge reduction. We're talking of just close to 30,000 down to 6 is absolutely unbelievable. And I'd suggest unprecedented as well in terms of the impact that across the public sector in terms of prevention work. It's an absolute beacon, not only Damsel, which is a relatively new intervention, but a lot of the prevention work has gone on previous to that as well. So really fantastic. I think it is down, as you touched on, Martin, is probably down into sort of cultural things now. Why does Kilvey Hill get set on fires? It is, children, generations have seen, older children doing it, and it gets passed down. It's almost a sort of it's almost a cultural norm in certain areas. It becomes the thing to do, is what kids do. So it's breaking those sort of cultural barriers is a real challenge. In education, we have an extensive education program that goes on, but it goes back to not only we've touched on earlier around air quality, we've talked around carbon reduction, carbon capture. But also civic pride, a huge thing in terms of, being proud of the city that we live in and the areas, so there's a lot of things that are impacted on this. And really grateful to NRW in terms of the work. And you've seen the pictures there today of the impact that's had. And as I say, if we can touch in with Martin Nichols in terms of some work there may be other sources of funding that we could utilise on a partnership basis that can help us all in the long term. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Roger. Midrian.
Well, thank you, Chair. Not to prolong it any further, just want to thank both yourself and to others on the PSB for my time today. Just want to say thank you to Jan Curtis as well. Always an advocate of the work we're doing, and really appreciate that, and great to see her on the board with us today. I'll send Martin the £5 later, so thank you, Martin, for that. But in terms on the point of on the point of the information, Martin, I'm quite happy to send you a narrative on what we've done there and moving that forward. And again, if anybody wants a bit more information about what we're doing specifically within the City and County of Swansea in terms of not just grass fires, but arson prevention in general, then you've got my contact details from the slides. More than happy to have that conversation and signpost some teams to you as well. To go and speak to individual departments if that's necessary. And perhaps to finish on a good note, in view of the activity we've had from previous years during the bank holiday weekend, taking into account now we've got a staycation, we've got a lot of activity now, and the weather's been great. Across Wales, we've seen a 30% activity this year to date during the bank holiday weekend compared with the previous years. So again, there's something in there. I don't want to speak too soon because in case it catches me out, but in terms of that's a real good start for us for a bank holiday weekend, considering all the pressures we're under. So thank you to you and everybody else who's got teams out there being our eyes and ears as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Midge. It's good. It's really positive to know that these discussions are going to take place offline as well with Martin Nichols. We have opportunities. We've got links to our young people through our schools, and I know that there's eco councils and eco committees on all of our schools who are very committed to tackling climate change. And we've seen today the strong links between us and reduction and climate change. That might be a route in to the conversations, so that young people, when they're growing up, have that message instilled, the importance of protecting wildlife, protecting our natural areas, and maybe that's something that could be explored further as well. But very grateful to you for the presentation. Thank you very much for attending today. Okay, so we've got a few more items on the agenda. I'll try not to prolong things too much, but the next item is to give feedback from the Public Service Board meeting with the Minister for Housing and Local Government and approval of our written response. So I know a draft response has been circulated. I'm sure Roger will want to come in as well, but Adam, Roger and myself attended the meeting. I think one of the strong messages came through was that public service boards aren't going anywhere. They are going to be with us for the duration. And so how do we add value? How do we avoid duplication and repetition with the other boards that we know are in existence? And how do we collaborate? I was really surprised at the amount of collaboration and voluntary mergers of PSBs going on across Wales. And I think that does strengthen the argument even further for Swansea and Neath and Talbot to merge. But the other clear message which came through was that organisations want, particularly local authorities, I think it's fair to say, to retain their individuality whilst at the same time merging and working together. And I think that's one message that the Minister certainly took away from the meeting. So mergers can be really positive. They avoid organisations, and I know many of you as partners on the meetings today attend multiple PSB meetings, and I'm sure that you'd welcome that if public service boards did merge on a regional footprint at the very least, then that would sort of reduce the amount of meetings to attend, the amount of duplication, and concentrate our efforts on adding value. Particularly, I think from our perspective, we think that community safety is one of the strong elements that PSBs can focus on, and the agenda items today very much reflect that. And also climate change could be something that we could really focus on, that I don't believe the other boards, for example, the RPB and the APB, are really focused on. So that's something that across the Swansea Bay footprint, there will inevitably be commonality and shared ambitions. So I'll leave it there. I won't say any more than that, but I think those messages came through very clear. Roger, I don't know if you want to add anything further, because I know that you raised some separate points as well.
Yeah, it seemed, thanks, Chair. I think it almost seemed to be a sort of east-west split in terms of the positive, a lot of the positive messages were coming from those boards that had merged, which was very encouraging, I think, and perhaps a reason to try and promote this within the local area as well. So I think perhaps were a little bit, some of our experiences were a little bit on the sort of not so positive side, shall I say it like that, and we challenged some of the things in terms of what you talk about, the landscape, the abundance of strategic partnerships, which are listed in the meeting. She does recognise that, Julie James, which is fair, and you know, some of the burden that's on us to maintain a number of strategic partnerships and the attendance of those, and with, you know, on occasion sort of similar types of agendas, and you know, there's not enough sort of disparity between those boards, I think was the point we were trying to make. But yeah, I think you captured most of the points there, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Adam, did you want to
talk
just about the draft response? And you also attended.
Yeah, I think just on reflection, although a number of other PSBs are looking to merge, the dilemma is still, and reinforced in the correspondence that follows this item through both 9 and 10, in terms of, on one hand, they're saying, you know, do what's best for the PSBs, look at merging. And then on the second hand, we have a letter coming from the same minister and the same departments and the Future Generations Commissioner saying that the wellbeing assessment must look at the individual PSB areas, looking specifically at smaller communities within that local PSB area, not a region. So somehow, you know, and we tried to get this over at the meeting, and you know, wasn't the same view for everyone. But there is a real push-pull there. On one hand, the Commissioner is telling us to do it locally. The Minister's now telling us to try and do it regionally, yet we still have to do a wellbeing assessment locally. So it really just needs all tying up, and probably not a good time with an election looming that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think that's the crux of the problem, is that there's no clear roadmap, if you like, in terms of how do we do this? How do we merge yet keep it the same? And we'll come on to the wellbeing assessment shortly in terms of we're looking to do a regional approach. But if we've still got to do a local aspect as well, we're going to end up meeting 3 times rather than the 2 times that we were going to do if we just have 2 individuals. We'll end up having 2 meetings for the individuals and then a 3rd one. So it's just yeah, just a really muddy water, really, in terms of how do we move this forward when everything is being challenged and rubbing against one another in terms of the way forward. So I mean, I'll leave it there, Chair. You've sort of said everything else, and it's really just to say, you know, we've gone back and responded accordingly. It's whether or not we want to do anything more formal at this stage, or whether or not we need to discuss this a bit further about how do we see the future, and then go back with a more robust, detailed response, or perhaps even commit time at the next meeting to really hammer out, you know, you've brought up some great points: climate change, community safety, human rights city would be another one perhaps to pull in there that we touched at before. You know, does that become our focus of our PSB? And actually it's a co-production model perhaps with Neathport Talbot over some of the areas. It's just, how do we stop the duplication of meetings, or make this really so important that we're happy to commit the time to it? And I just think we need to explore that in more detail before we try and put a new work program in place that just kind of repeats the same issues that we've already got.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So I think the offer is there to add this as an agenda item to discuss in more detail at our next meeting. I can't see anybody indicating. Is everybody happy with that way forward? Great. Okay, thank you. We'll add that item next time, and we'll talk that in more detail. The other thing, which is not yet in the mix, but which is on the horizon, are corporate joint committees as well, at another level of bureaucracy. And so, you know, we're not really sure what the impact is going to be from those either. So I think it's more critically important than ever that the PSB has focus and sharpens that focus, and that at all costs we try and avoid duplication, because, you know, we're all very busy as organisations, busier than ever as it happens. So we need to make the best use of our time, I think. So thank you for that suggestion. We'll add that to the next agenda. So moving on then, aptly to our local wellbeing assessment. And I believe we've got Steve King on the line. So over to you, Steve.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. And yeah, Adam did sort of build up part of the issue that we've got to deal with in this aspect of things, certainly. But I know time is going on, so I'll just quickly go through the main parts of the report. Obviously, this follows on to the report that I brought to the previous meeting in February, and there's a link to that in the report. And in that, we talked about setting up an editorial group and a research forum to progress the wellbeing assessment that we need to do around about 12 months from now. And this report really just sets out some of those developments since, which has already been touched upon in part. As Adam mentioned earlier, we had a pretty limited response really to the approach that we suggested last time and the follow-up. But as Adam said, that this may have been affected by other developments since, which has sort of changed the landscape a little bit at least. And that's mainly that in early March, the chair of Neath Talbot PSB wrote to our chair, proposing that the PSBs, the Regional Partnership Board and the Health Board work on a common approach to the various assessments that are required over broadly similar timeframes, which seems eminently sensible in principle. And moving on from that, there is an initial meeting of a coordination board formed to progress that particular proposal, which is around about the end of next week, I believe. And some of the statutory partners here today will be involved in that. So I think overall it's fair to say that we're still in a quite fluid situation as to how this all might work beyond the sort of general principle that everybody seems to be happy to sign up to in making life, easier for everyone, getting through this next 12 months. Another development that we've had since our last joint committee was that we did finally have something from Welsh Government in terms of their expectations for the 2022 wellbeing assessments, which I've also attached here as separate documents in Appendix C. Yeah, lots of points made in that, and you can probably pick out lots of things from that. The main things I picked out from it, that it's that the Welsh Government and Future Generations Commissioner was saying that it should be about the purpose and not the process, and that ultimately the assessment's main role is to sort of is to get us to priorities for the wellbeing plan. And there are all sorts of aspects to that which they put in that document. So it's helpful up to a point, I would say. I mean, it's perhaps been long awaited in terms of when it was first mentioned, and perhaps you could say that there might have been a little bit more to it, but there we are. It is what it is. But it is helpful in certain respects, certainly, I think. Moving on from that, for various reasons, including that the approach we suggested at the last meeting didn't really go as planned, and also, the regional dimension to all this is still sort of finding its way with meetings going on, and the sort of ticking clock moving on in the background as well. As a result of all this, we're proposing through this paper to set up what we've, for want of a better phrase, called a shadow assessment group, just to begin to look at the different aspects of the task ahead, really, in that we have to get to grips with, I think, sooner rather than later, and perhaps not necessarily wait until all the regional discussions are established, even though we feel and recognise that we might have to change course in some ways as a result of these regional discussions. I think it's perhaps useful to get people's attention and involvement in this project. And we have outlined some potential dates for a meeting later this month, which we haven't emailed to the people we think that are best placed to help us yet, but it's pretty much ready to go, subject to nobody minding that pretty soon after this meeting now. So as I said, it's people's involvement that we're requesting is pretty much on the understanding, and we'll make this clear whenever the meeting is, that it is quite a fluid situation, and the and the task and the arrangements may have to change, especially in the early days. I've also added, just for information really, a sort of a draft timeline of how the next 12 months ahead might pan out, mainly based on what happened in this exercise 5 years ago now, and again it's subject to changes and new arrangements, so it's very much on the basis of what we know now really, and again we'll revisit this in light of discussions that happen in the near future. So really that's where we're at the moment. Subject to the committee's acceptance, we're proposing to carry on, make that start of involving the people that we think that are most likely to be able to contribute to this exercise, and go from there. But obviously keep an eye on other developments as well and react accordingly, shall we say. So that's about where we are at the moment, and happy to take any points or queries.
Thank you, Steve. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the board to say that all your work is very much appreciated, and we appreciate that it's a fluid situation at this moment in time. I could see Adam is indicating, so Adam, you wanted to add to it?
Oh yes, please. So the meeting of the coordination board is on the 16th of April. So far we've not even started as a region in terms of pulling this together. So we're now under a year before we need to have got this done, and we haven't even started talking as a region, which is for me a real concern. I think it's good that we're looking at a regional basis. In one regard. However, as Steve's alluded to, the expectations from Welsh Government and the Future Generations Commissioner are that this is done at a local PSB level, and that's what they're going to look for in terms of the wellbeing assessment. If we turn that on its head and just go regional, we're still going to have to do the work locally regardless. Even if we go regional, the footwork still needs to be undertaken on a local level, because we've got to gather that data and edit it and manage it and assess it. So I think there is something about a local working group that can get that data together, pushes it up to the region to coordinate the final part of this. And I think we're looking at it the wrong way round. I think we need to be looking at the regional group and picking up later down the line when we've done the analysis to see where the synergies are, where the wellbeing assessment then after that can be used for the two groups to merge together or co-produce together later down the line. I think it's good to have a coordinating group that can start joining those dots early, but I so far have seen nothing that gives me the confidence that we're going to end up being able to do this regionally and support the local and deliver what we need to deliver to meet the Act. The Act hasn't changed, regardless of who allegedly is going to merge or isn't merged as PSBs. They're not merged yet, none of them, and looking at their minutes, they're not likely to anytime soon. So for me, there is a real concern if we sit back and wait for the region to deliver this. I don't think it will. So I still stand by where we were previously, in that we need all partners to commit somebody to that local editorial group to work in their areas. It won't be wasted, because if we do go regional partway through this process, we just shove all the information up to the region and we can work on it there if it comes to fruition. If it doesn't, we're putting all our eggs in one basket and we're going to end up having 6 months in order to try and turn something round, which will be nigh on impossible by that time. So my preference to the board, to the committee, is no, we do what we said we were going to do initially while this regional coordination group sets up. So we identify somebody from the key strategic partnership in order to drive forward this editorial group. I think failure to do that may leave us high and dry as a group when we come to actually develop this. My view, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Steve, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that at all. Obviously, you know, the situation that we put out in February was our preferred approach at the time, which nobody dissented from at the time, and for the good reasons Adam said. Yeah, you know, we would still obviously like to get that involvement from you know, the partners at the local level as well, at least initially. And if things evolve over the coming months, then perhaps the working arrangements may have an opportunity to evolve. But it would be good perhaps to get that over, you know, that involvement early as we can. I would agree. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that approach either. I think the earlier that we get started, the better. I can see Amanda very helpfully has put suggestions of 2 members from SCVS as well. So I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we know we need to produce a local assessment just based on Swansea's footprint. But when we've had the approach to collaborate, given that we want PSBs to voluntarily merge, which is the aspiration, difficult to refuse that request to work together. So I think it's a balance of working on our local assessment, which we know we'll need to produce, but also at the same time looking to sort of collaborate across border as well. And I think that's difficult when we know resources are stretched. So I really do appreciate that. Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm treading lightly on this week, so I'm not quite sure where we're actually going here, whether we are going to produce a product for Swansea or contribute to something more widely, and in fact whether there'll be 4 PSB wellbeing assessments across the footprint of South West Wales, so far as I'm concerned. And do we need, you know, 4? And are we, Steve, you know, looking to produce something jointly with Equatorial? But I'm not quite clear where we are really, because I think I'm probably right in saying that NRW is the only organisation here that operates across the 4 in South West Wales, Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire included. And if we think that we should be looking for a commitment from an organisation to do something collaboratively and jointly, then you'd probably get that from us, because you know, we think that way. So
I think the difficulty we've got, Martin, is it's not us driving the agenda. We're being told that the requirement is for us to have our own individual local wellbeing assessment, and unless guidance from Welsh Government changes on that, that's what we'll be required to submit. So I think in an ideal world, we would be happy to collaborate and merge the plan with Neath and Talbot. But the reality is that the requirement is we can't do that. We have to submit our own individual ones. So there's the dilemma, and it is really difficult. But I appreciate your support for us to work together. Unless I'm going to call Adam in, unless there are any, I don't know, suggestions, whether we write to the Minister and say we'd like to submit one jointly. And would the Minister be happy to accept that? But as Adam pointed out earlier, we're heading into a Senedd election, and it's probably not the best time to be asking those questions, and we may be waiting some time for the response. So Adam, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Martin's right on one level. I absolutely agree. I think the more we can join up, the better. And there's a lot of things, certainly in your area, Martin, where I can see that. But if we look at the whole of the wellbeing assessment, a lot of it will be local to Swansea. It won't be something that we'll be able to generally pick up with Neath. It will be our target audience, where our deprivation model is, where our health inequalities are, and so on. I think if we develop that for this year, knowing that actually, let's say from Natural Resources Wales point of view, yes, there are 4 plans, but if all those 4 plans are the same, then why shouldn't we get together with all 4 authorities rather than the 2 and work across a 4 in terms of joining up those elements that actually make the sense? The same as we do with the community safety partnership. We have lots of things local to us, like the High Street, which isn't the same in Neath. However, County Lines is. So those things we're looking to. Integrated health approach that we're looking to do. Again, that should be across multiple areas where we'll join again, but there will still be local areas that we'll need to pick up. But it has to start from an assessment base that is, well, what does Swansea need? What does Neath need? And what do we both need that we can join together on? And I just think that bit comes later down the line for this year, while we can renegotiate with Welsh Government and the Future Generations Commissioner on actually change the legislation so that we can work together where we need to. And on one level it's saying we can, but on the next bit in statute it says that we have to produce the wellbeing assessment for Swansea. So at the moment we're in danger of going against the Act, which I know will only be used against us if we do something against it, and that will come out of the local government and elections. From a performance point of view of public bodies, we won't be able to show good governance because we've gone against what the Act says that we're meant to do. So again, we're just being tied up in every which way. It's unfortunate timing. We've been waiting for the advice and the expectation from Welsh Government for many months, and it comes just at a point we go into a time when we can't really get any further answers or negotiations. So I think it's, let's do the assessment locally, co-produce though those elements that we can as we go along this journey, so that where, so like yourself, Martin, you've got more than one area, we can put those links together. Won't detract from the wellbeing assessment, will enhance a future working across where it's multiple areas.
Thanks, Adam. Martin?
Yeah, we shouldn't prolong it. I agree, and I think between yourself and Amanda in the chat, Adam, you've kind of nailed where we need to go on this. The measure will be the production of a local one, and it needs to be that, and I can see why, because we need to deliver something as an output that is as close to the point of service delivery and have that relevance as possible for communities to engage and pick up on it and for us to deliver. Very much agree with that. But I just wonder whether, and I'd be happy to commit my resource to it, whether we could maybe over the course of the next 8 or 9 months commit to a monthly, coming together just to check on one another's work in a sense, and see where those commonalities are coming through. And if it emerges that we could develop a product, maybe even a couple of sides showing where things are common across all 4, then we should, without wishing to add to the work. And because I'm sure there will be some things that we'll be picking out across the 4 as themes, but the focus of it should be the local stuff. I think it's got to be, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're right there, Martin. And I think for me, that's what that coordination group is. On that region is each of us go talk about what we're doing, where the synergies are, and try and identify that at that regional level. The editorial group that we were talking about locally is the one that will do the nuts and bolts, the engine room that makes it local for us, for all the things that Amanda's put in the chat in order to keep it local, but share it at that regional coordination group to find those links where we can move that forward. And I think ready for the next one in a few years' time, absolutely ready then to go to battle to actually be able to merge and look at how things can be done. But we can't lose that local link, because there are lots of areas within the wellbeing assessment that are absolutely local to Swansea and will not be seen in any other authority area or health board area. But likewise, there will be some that are. So it's getting that balance. Yeah,
and conversely, there'll be issues which are very poignant for other local authorities in the region and not for us. And so I think it does seem logical that there's a starting point, which is what's our list, and then looking at what's the commonality and common areas across the piece. So if we're suggesting it's a Swansea Bay City region footprint, then Adam, are you going to link with the other local authorities to suggest that at some point there's going to have to be a group across the piece that's going to look at the common areas?
Yeah, I think I think it's a two-stage, because we've only got a year to do this, and we need to be sent. So I think we do our wellbeing assessment Swansea, linking with Neath Port Talbot as Swansea Bay in that first instance. So by the time we get to the end of the year, we've got a Swansea and Neath Port Talbot and a joint area of work. And then within the new plan in the new year, what's that, April 22, we look to see other PSB areas or across the Swansea Bay City Deal region, and then look at where those synergies are. I think if we try and do it all now, we'll just fall over ourselves in terms of trying to link all that together. I think there is a good synergy between us and Neath, county lines, all those kind of things. And then phase 2 will be, how do we engage with everybody else? But yeah, I'll take that lead as and when the time's right down the line.
Okay, that sounds like a sensible approach to me. I'd be happy to endorse that. So Steve, you've got links clearly with your significant other in Neath Port Talbot, and perhaps we'd be grateful on behalf of the board if you could explain that's the approach we're going to take, is we're going to work on our individual plan first and then meet up with them to collaborate on where the overlap is.
Yeah.
That makes sense, and also it reduces risk in terms of us producing our plan, which I think we do need to be mindful of. And then when the timing is right, as Adam has suggested, we open that up across the Bay City region. Okay, so I can't see anyone indicating, I can't see anybody not supportive of that approach. So if everybody's happy, we will move that forward. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Okay, so moving on to items for information only, but did you want to add anything, Adam?
No, the only bit was I was going to ask Martin about the 25k and understand his pressures, and if anything we can do to support him in gaining that funding, because what we heard earlier from the fire service is so key that a small amount of money can make such a huge difference. So if we can support you, Martin, in any way, don't hesitate to get in touch. Other than that, Chair, it's really taken as read in terms of the support grant. The details are there of what we've applied for to help with the wellbeing assessment. And then finally, the Natural Resources Wells Grant, everyone's getting their information in. We've got until next week in order to get the final bits and sign off, but some really good projects that have made a huge difference. And we'll report back on those projects and the difference that they've made, as we've heard from the fire service today, perhaps on some of those others, because I think it'll be a good to show, what came through the PSB and what happened on the back of that money. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. So the future work programme has been circulated. As always, if any members have any agenda items that they want to suggest or put forward, by all means, please contact Leanne and we can make sure that they're included on the agenda. But looking forward to having a guest speaker from Natural Resource Wales in our meeting in June, and people will note that we've got the wellbeing assessment on that agenda as well, just to get an update from Steve as to how that's going. Adam?
Yeah, it was just to say, because if Martin hasn't read all of his papers, he might not have realised that he's sorting out a guest speaker. But this came out of the discussions that we'd had previously at the PSB, where partners were saying they want to get more engaged with the agenda and actually almost show something that's happening. So fire service, again, we're doing theirs this time, Martin. So some opportunity there again to show the connection with the PSB and ask of the PSB and so on, and that will be replicated across the future meetings for all partners to show something. And again, it just helps bring that in. I'd suggest, Chair, that we were going to do a members development session at the next one, that we knock that one on the head on the back of talking a bit more around what's the future of the PSB and what are the key areas. So I think we'll refocus the socio-economic duty and the development session, knock those off of that one, and so we've got a really good lump of time in order to focus on what are the priorities for us so we can get some projects underway and really get some focus in for the remainder of this year.
Yeah, I think that's sensible, and that can help us formulate our future agendas for future meetings. So that makes good sense to me. Okay, so does anybody have any items of any other business? Nobody. So the next meeting is 17th of June. In the meantime, please stay safe. Thank you for attending today, and take care. And I'm just hoping I don't have any flu symptoms tomorrow that some people suffer after the vaccine. Fingers crossed.
You're not 50, are you?
Sorry?
You're not 50, are you?
I had my jab, today. I'm just a couple of years off 50, and this is on a recorded meeting I've just announced to the world. So.
Anyway, excellent time. Back on 5 o'clock. Thank you.
My age was top secret. Okay, thank you ever so much to you all for attending. It's been a really, really good meeting today, I have to say. So as I said, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you all in June.
Thanks, all. Bye.
Thanks.